the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell.
Okay, good afternoon. My name's Hugo. I'm a journalist for KSL News Radio. Today we are going to be chatting a little bit about just wrapping up the week that's just gone for what is, one of the biggest trials so far of 2023. Joining me is my co-host, Aimee Cobabe. Aimee, tell us a little bit about yourself, mate.
Hey, well, I'm here in Boise, Idaho. Have been here for the last few days covering the Lori Vallow Daybell trial. As a reporter, it's been pretty interesting to come and see kind of the range of other journalists that are here, because you have TV stations from across the country. You also have some local little newspapers here. And then you also have, there've been a lot of podcasters, people that are putting together podcasts and things. And I think really with this case, you've seen a lot of interest in kind of the true crime aspect of it and people that have followed this for the last 3 years. So it's definitely going to be an interesting case to see how it's covered. And of course, we here at KSL News Radio are covering it on air and also doing this. We want to, in this kind of every week, do a wrap up of what happened there, be your eyes and ears in the courtroom, and answer any questions that anyone has.
Yeah, absolutely. And as this sort of gets underway, if you're tuning in live or in a it'll be then up on the website and the Facebook page and that sort of thing. And we'll give you details where you can find this. But I mean, first up, Aimee, you have been in the courtroom this week. It's been jury selection. This case has everything. Take me into the courtroom.
Right, the case does have everything. It really does. And it's interesting because it's taken so long. The jury selection originally was expected to take just a few days, especially after the death penalty was taken off the table. And it has not taken just a few days. It took 4 straight days of bringing potential jurors in, asking them everything from, have you heard about any of these charges before? And have you formed an opinion about this even? And there were a lot of people that knew about this case. A lot of people were excused because they knew too much.
Thank you, Netflix.
Yeah, thank Netflix and Dateline and everybody else that has been following this. It was interesting. Yesterday, one woman did not want to. She had some travel planned. Did not want to be chosen, and was kind of Googling. She said, during questioning, that she was Googling how many they still needed. And the prosecution was like, you Googled it? You weren't supposed to Googling this case.
That was like rule 1.
Rule 1. So she got excused because she was like, seemed kind of innocent, but that was enough.
Yeah. So, Aimee, have you seen Lori yet? Has she been in the room?
Yeah, she's in the room, and she's there sitting between. She has 2 lawyers that are representing her, and she's sat between the 2 of them. The first day, I think she seemed a little bit more relaxed. It's interesting to watch because we've seen her in the last few years come into court, and also when she was arrested, just look very bubbly. I think that's her personality. A lot of people have described her as, and I definitely saw that yesterday in court. She seemed bubbly. There's many times where everyone in the courtroom is asked to stand and she just jumps right up. She's got a lot of energy, and so It is interesting to see that. And it'll be interesting, I think, to see how if that changes when we have some witnesses in the room and people on the stand actually talking about her. We also know that many of her family members who are victims in this case, victims because they have a relationship to her children, will be in that room. And the judge has kind of changed his decision there to allow them to be there. So, where will they sit? They'll be pretty close. And will that impact kind of her demeanor? We'll have to see, and that will start on Monday, first thing.
Well, Aimee, what's really interesting, I mean, this case isn't just, capturing the attention of the US. As I'm sure it's no secret, people can probably work out that I didn't grow up in the United States. And before moving out here in November, the documentary, I think, dropped in September around then. And we all watched it. And it's funny you've said that she's quite a bubbly personality, because the documentary and the other media scrutiny and that sort of thing, I certainly would never have picked that up just from reading and watching.
Yeah, she's also been pretty actively conversing with her lawyers several times. I look up and she's leaning into one, whispering. They're looking at the same papers, and so, those are little things that we have so little to go on in the courtroom, that you're watching that she really is being scrutinized over these little things. But those are things that I imagine will also be interesting for the jury to look at, and they'll be watching her behavior. As we understand from some of the questioning for the potential jurors, there's going to be some gruesome, that was a word used, gruesome photographs and evidence that comes up. Children autopsies and things like that
Yes.
that are going to be hard to look at. And so, how will she react to that as well when that evidence is presented in court?
Well, all eyes are certainly on her. Now, during this podcast series, we're going to be talking to some special guests, people with vested interests, people who are just experts in their field. And one of those joins us today. He's our KSL legal analyst. If you've ever listened to KSL News Radio, you would know who he is, Greg Skordas. Thanks very much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you. And thank you, Aimee, for not driving while you're doing the podcast today. I noticed you're in your car, but you're parked, and I appreciate that.
Parked very safely. Yeah, it's kind of interesting as a reporter. You often you end up looking for safe places to park, because you have to work kind of all hours and in weird locations. But Boise's not weird. It's been a great little town. So, yeah.
From everything I've heard, Aimee's a pretty aggressive driver as well. So I don't know if it would have made it past our swearing privileges on this.
Feed the fish.
Anyway, Greg, one of the things I'd like to ask about is, we've been starting to talk about this case in the news for the last couple of weeks. And one of the major first things was the death penalty being taken off. How is that significant, and what does that mean for the trial going forward?
Well, right now it's significant because this jury process, the jury selection process, like Aimee just said, has taken almost the entire week. I mean, here we are Friday afternoon, and we finally have a jury, so we can start opening statements on Monday morning. Had there been a death penalty, this process would have taken much longer. And I'll tell you why. Anytime you have a capital case, a death penalty case, the jurors have to be what we call death qualified. And I know that's a horrible phrase to use, but it means that they are willing to follow the law as it relates to the death penalty. Now, everybody can follow the law. It seems like if you find somebody guilty or innocent of a murder or a theft or something like that, or all the crimes that Lori's charged with. But in a death penalty case, the jury decides the punishment. It's the only case we do that in America, where the jury decides the punishment. Otherwise, the judge does. And so the jury has to understand and be willing to impose the penalty of death if that's appropriate. I mean, they have to be willing to. I mean, if you say, I absolutely oppose the death penalty, you can't serve on a jury on a death penalty case. So it would have taken a little bit longer having that off the table. But like I've said numerous times, I don't think an Idaho jury was going to give Lori Vallow the death penalty anyway. So I don't think that will, in the end run, make a difference in this case.
Why do you say that? What is it about Boise jury?
Well, I'm not necessarily equating it to Boise as much as just a Western jury. And I'll just be honest, she's a white woman. That's the least likely person in America to get the death penalty on a percentage basis. She clearly suffers from a mental illness. I mean, she's been declared incompetent at least twice in this case. And I think we'll get to this in a minute, Hugo, when you talk about opening statements. But I think part of the defense is going to be not only her mental illness, but as it relates to her following Chad, who's probably going to be painted as the real monster in this case by her defense team. And so I think a jury hearing that, I mean, she has no prior criminal history. She's got a mental illness. She's involved with this man who by all accounts was manipulative. And I just don't see that this would have been resulted in a death penalty by the jury. So I think the judge did the right thing by throwing it off the table. He did it for other reasons. He was upset at the prosecution for giving evidence late and not complying with the rules of discovery, getting the defense what they needed in time to prepare. And he just said, look, you guys have made this so difficult for the defense. My remedy is either to take the death penalty off the table or stall the trial for a couple more months so the defense could get up to speed. And he took plan A.
Aimee, I've got a question.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, Aimee, you've been in the courtroom like we just discussed. Is Lori Vallow, is she in a jumpsuit? For those who don't understand, has she been, what's the...
She's been in just, a kind of not a jumpsuit, a black kind of suit jacket with a nicer top. I think she was in a skirt yesterday. So dressed nicer, what you would wear to court, really, if you're trying to be professional. It looks like professional clothing for sure. And that's, I've heard from others who've been in and seen some of her other pre-trial appearances, and something similar is what she's worn. And I wonder, though, Greg, a little bit about that. If the jury is looking at her behavior during the court proceedings and how this whole trial is expected to go on for 8 weeks was the number they kept saying during jury selection. Does that impact them at all? Just her appearance and her demeanor?
Oh, yes. And Aimee, that's a good point, because it would very much taint the jury. It would very much prejudice them if she's showing up every day in a jumpsuit and her hands cuffed together. So even though she is in custody, this happens all the time. But when an inmate comes into the courtroom, they're wearing their civilian clothes. They're not handcuffed. They're not shackled, so that the jury doesn't have that feeling that, wow, they must be guilty or they wouldn't be in that outfit. So yeah, she'll be wearing probably a different outfit every single day. But more importantly, you made a great point, Aimee, when you said she's sort of talking to her attorneys, and that's something that we do as defense attorneys. We try to humanize our clients a little bit in front of the jury, and maybe reach over and talk to them, and even get close to them, even like maybe put your arm on them or something, just so the jury has the impression that they're not a monster, that you're not afraid of them, that there's some sort of level of confidence that you have, and the jury can see her bantering and see the lawyers bantering. That's some of that's designed. Some of that's designed to give the jury some level of comfort, that instead of the attorney sort of being standoffish with their own client as though there's some sort of a monster. You don't want to get close to them. So this body language that you're seeing, Aimee, that you've described is exactly what I would have expected. And the jury will be watching her, especially when they get into some of the testimony as it relates to her children. And like you say, the gruesomeness, and they'll be watching how she reacts to that. She's a mother. Is she going to break down as a mother, or is she going to be the cold person that the prosecution's trying to paint, who just is stoic and like, hey, it's stuff happens and this isn't my fault. I mean, I imagine she's going to be a mother, and when this jury watches her, and I think that she'll show some emotion when it gets to the evidence about the children.
Greg, that's really interesting. But sorry, he cut you off again, Hugo. Right, it's interesting that you bring that up because there were several mothers, and we understand that there's 8 women on this jury, and we don't know if they're mothers or if they're fathers among the men. But it did come up in the questioning. Many people were asked, "Are you a parent? And could you look at evidence of children and then also would that affect you to the point where you couldn't look at other evidence and consider what that meant in this case? And so that's so interesting that you bring that up. And that was actually a reason why several people were dismissed. They didn't pass that question. They were honest in saying they couldn't look at that. One man even said, I lost my son a few years ago and I couldn't even fill out the questionnaire. I was so disturbed by even just filling out the questionnaire. Is that pretty common to hear those kinds of things early on?
Yeah, and any kind of a case, let's say it's a sex crime case or a violent case or a drug case, you ask the members of the jury, do you have any close friends or family members who have had either been a victim of this or have had drug problems? Because they bring something to the table that a juror, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it takes their objectivity and sort of tweaks it a little bit. Maybe they've got some experience in this. Maybe they've got some feelings about this. Somebody who's lost their child, he may be so upset by that he can't put blinders on and just hear this case based on the evidence that's being presented. So there was like a 20-page jury questionnaire in this case. It may have even been longer than that, but there was a lot of information gathered about these jurors even before they went in the courtroom. And we started this conversation that you've been privy to, Aimee, over the last few days, where you've seen the attorneys ask them questions and the judge ask the jurors questions. You want to find out as much as you can about them and try to get a jury, and both sides want this. Both sides want this, and the judge, of course, a jury who is fair, who is not prejudge this case, and who are all willing to decide the evidence based on what's presented to them over the next 6 to 8 weeks.
Greg, one question I've sort of been thinking about for a while now is, we've all heard about the media publicity and what impact that's going to have on the jury and that sort of thing. But just as a defense attorney, how do you defend someone like Lori Vallow Daybell, which, she's got probably some of the most horrific crimes that she's, being accused of here?
Hugo, she's presumed innocent, and in America, everyone is. So you start that, and you can bet that her defense attorneys will hammer that home pretty hard, and they probably already have. I mean, I think the jurors in their questionnaire were even asked, the law is that a person accused of a crime is presumed innocent. Are you willing to follow that law? And if they said no, they wouldn't have even been in the courtroom. So you have to start with that. And then I think you just have to humanize her. And if it means that you throw Chad under the bus, that's what you have to do. Or if you even just make her mental illness such a critical part of this that she may not have fully appreciated what was going on. But you're right, Hugo. I mean, the crime's horrific. I mean, most of us who are parents can't imagine anything worse than harming your own child. I mean, that's about as bad as it gets, especially you think about a mother and child. I mean, that's probably the strongest bond there is. And so they're going to have to overcome that. And the defense is, if in fact she did this crime and she's involved in it, and explain away why, if Chad did it, she allowed it to occur, what she did and how she maybe tried to intervene or anything she may have done to try to prevent this from occurring.
Do you think, in your experience, do you think she'll take the stand?
And as a defense attorney, well, actually, when I was a prosecutor, the best part of every trial was when the defendant took the stand, because they almost always gave me something I could run with. I mean, I was like the highlight of the trial for me as a prosecutor, just going after the defendant, because they always slipped up. They always said things. They always went too far. And then I even had jurors say, Skordas, you were losing until the defendant took the stand, and then you won the case. And as a defense attorney, you have to think about that. If it comes down to it, and by the way, if she does testify, she will be the last witness from the defense to testify. They'll wait until everybody else testifies, and then they'll weigh that decision. And if they think they're losing, if they think we've got nothing to lose here, we're already in the hole, let's put her on the stand, then they'll do that. They may also tell us that they're going to do that in their opening statements on Monday. So they may say, members of the jury, you will hear from Lori Vallow. She will testify and she will tell you her involvement in this. And if that's the case, then they're sort of forced to do that, because they've already primed the jury to hear from her. That's going to take a lot of work, and she's going to have to look at that jury, not her attorney. She'll be asked a question, and she will turn to the jury and she will answer them. And she's going to have to look every one of those 12 people in the eye and say what she thinks the truth is and what happened here. And the jury's going to be on the edge of their seats when she testifies, if she does. My guess is they'll almost certainly have to put her on the stand.
And so the opening statements, as we get to that on Monday, what are you expecting? I mean, it's so, we've seen in the last few months kind of some discussion on evidence coming forward, phone calls and things that weren't submitted in the right time, and the death penalty, of course, coming off the table. And so those opening statements are actually, when a lot of us are expecting to get to the meat of this case, at least the first little taste of it. And so that will be, a big day for this case. But does that also have a big impact in jurors' minds? Will that stick with them, or is it just kind of a teaser for what's to come?
Kind of both, Amy. That's a good question. When I was a prosecutor, I went to the National College of District Attorneys, and they would tell us that after your opening statement, 75% of the juries have already made up their mind. I don't know that that's true. I don't really feel like that when I do trials, but the prosecution has to come right out of the chute with this case in their opening, and they have to tell the jury everything that they're going to see over the next 6 to 8 weeks. And they better present that evidence. If you say, you're going to hear that so-and-so observed this, and they talked to Lori afterwards, and she said this, and then they don't call so-and-so, they're going to look really bad. So the prosecution has to not only put on a compelling case, but a case that they're going to be able to back up word for word, line for line. I'm really more interested in the prosecution's opening in this case because it will outline their evidence. It will outline the level of DNA they've got. It will outline the forensic evidence they've got. It will outline the phone calls and the conversations and things that they may have from Lori, even if she doesn't testify. Whereas the defense is going to be more poking holes in the prosecution's case, creating reasonable doubt, making the jury feel some sympathy toward Lori, and they may not be quite as forthcoming in their opening statements as the prosecution. The prosecution really can't hold anything back, and that opening statement may take half a day Monday or longer.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested to see that. I know you'll be in the courtroom. I'm in the courtroom as well. We'll see you there, and there's definitely a lot of interest here in Boise that I've seen, and a lot of people that you have to fight to get a seat in the room, and you go through a whole reservation process. And the fact that there's no cameras, we're trying to be the eyes and the ears for everyone that's not there, that can't see this, that we'll talk about it more. And so looking forward to kind of painting that picture.
And often, as you know, crimes are tried in the jurisdiction where the crime occurred. We call that venue. So, but this isn't going to be tried where it occurred. They're trying it in the big city of Boise, which is the biggest jurisdiction you have in Idaho. And so, we don't often, a crime that occurs in Moab, we don't try it in Salt Lake, or a crime that occurs in St. George, we don't try it in Ogden. We try it where the crime occurred. This case is an exception to that, and that's because the defense felt that they probably couldn't get a fair jury in the really small Southern County jurisdiction where the crime is alleged to have occurred. So the bigger city, the more populous, the less maybe people have heard about this, or maybe just even know somebody who's a witness, who happens to be their neighbor or their former school teacher or somebody like that, somebody that was in their neighborhood or in their church or something. You don't want jurors to be tainted by that. So getting away, even though it's only a couple 100 miles, probably gives this jury a little bit more of a fresh look and maybe more of a fair trial to both sides in this case.
Yeah.
Greg, I've got one more question before we wrap it up. And this is sort of just what we've been talking about in the newsroom, and we're all looking to, I think Aimee and I are going to take turns being up in Boise. But one thing I was interested about is Lori and Chad are getting tried separately, what sort of impact we've had the Netflix documentary. This court case is going to have a million different podcasts on it, a lot of media scrutiny. What sort of impact is this trial of Lori going to have on Chad's when it eventually comes around?
So both Lori and Chad, Hugo, wanted separate trials. It's both of them wanted to do that. And the reason for that is what we call the empty chair defense, because they can always blame the other. It's a little hard to do when you're sitting next to each other in a courtroom and you're still arguably husband and wife. I think that the attorneys for Chad are going to be watching this very closely. And I'll tell you why. One important thing, we started this conversation talking about the death penalty and that it was taken off the table for Lori. Chad is almost certainly a less sympathetic individual. And if the jury convicts Lori, and especially if they convict her of first-degree felony murder, which is just the step below capital homicide, I think Chad and his people have every reason to be very fearful about their trial, because in my estimation, the evidence is probably more compelling against him than it will be against her. And so his attorneys are going to be sitting back watching what happens there, because he's going to have a harder time blaming her for all this than she is blaming him. And
well,
that's probably each of their strongest defenses. Sort of, hey, it was his fault, it was her fault.
Well, that's sort of what I was wondering, because if say in 8 weeks' time we find out that she's she's been declared innocent or something like that, it doesn't leave a lot of room, I could only assume, for Chad Daybell to get the same verdict if the only other person who the world's pointing the finger at is suddenly gets off.
Unless Hugo, she is acquitted because the state just didn't have its act together. They just didn't have enough evidence. Because if they don't have enough evidence against one, they may have a hard time against the other. So I'm not saying that's the case, but if she's acquitted and the jury walks out of there thinking that Chad Daybell is a real son of a gun, then I would say he's going to be in a little bit of trouble.
Wow.
Sure. Greg Skordas, KSL's legal analyst, thanks so much for joining us today for the first episode of quite a pretty big week in the trial of Lori Vallow Daybell. We really appreciate your time.
You bet. See you Sunday, Aimee.
See you Sunday. Drive safe.
Aimee, pretty informative chat just then.
Yeah, it's great. I spoke to Greg a couple of days ago too, and just talked about how long this is taking. And for us, it's great because we've got lots to talk about, and he's an expert, so we'll keep talking about it. And there's a lot more we didn't even get to that we were hoping to get to today, and that we could talk about the trial. So we'll get back to that. And too, if there's any questions, because there's a lot of complications in this case, a lot of characters, a lot of people. Would love to, if you're confused, straighten that out for anyone and have that chat. So let us know.
Yeah, and as I said, we're doing this once a week. We're aiming for every Friday. It'll be live streamed, and also you can also access it after. If you do have any questions, for sure, put it in the comments section on whatever site you're going to be watching it on. And we've got a lot of interesting guests. We're going to have people who are in the courtroom. We're going to have former FBI agents who have worked on similar cases to give their insight. So certainly a pretty big couple of weeks going forward. Aimee, I'm going to let you drive back to Salt Lake City.
Talk to you again soon. Thanks, Hugo. Bye.
See you later. Bye, guys.